I've always been the type to take shortcuts, not out of laziness, but because I hate wasting time. If there's a quicker way to get somewhere, why not take it? That mindset has served me well in life, until the day it didn't. Last fall, my friend Lena and I planned a weekend hiking trip. The plan was simple: a 2-day loop through a national forest neither of us had explored before. We had a map, GPS, and plenty of supplies. It was supposed to be easy. The first day went smoothly. We covered a lot of ground, set up camp near a small creek, and spent the evening roasting marshmallows over a fire. The forest was quiet, peaceful even, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the only people in the world. The next morning, we packed up early, eager to finish the loop before sunset. According to the map, the trail would lead us in a wide arc back to the trailhead. But halfway through, we came across an old, overgrown path that veered sharply off the main trail. It wasn't on the map, and there was something else. Right where the path began, nailed crookedly to a tree, was an old, rusted horseshoe. It didn't look decorative. It was covered in scratches, as if something had clawed at the metal. Below it, faint letters had been carved into the bark. "Go back." Lena frowned. That's not ominous at all. I laughed it off, masking the slight chill creeping up my spine. Probably just some prank. But as we stood there, debating whether to take the path, I could swear I heard something faint in the distance. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking gently on wood over and over. We decided to take the shortcut anyway. At first, it felt like any other trail, narrower, sure, with tangled roots and overgrown shrubs, but manageable. The canopy grew denser, the light dimming even though it was mid-morning. The air felt heavier, like the forest was pressing in on us. The rhythmic tapping faded, replaced by an eerie stillness. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of our footsteps on dry leaves. After about 20 minutes, Lena stopped. "Does this feel wrong to you?" I wanted to say no, to keep up the brave front, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just nodded and kept walking, though each step felt heavier than the last. We passed a tree with deep gashes in its bark, long parallel cuts that didn't look like they were made by any animal I knew. The sap oozing from them was dark, almost black, and smelled faintly metallic. Lena grabbed my arm. We should turn back, but when we turned around, the trail behind us was gone. Worse than that was the smell. It hit us suddenly, thick and cloying, like rotting meat mixed with something sharp and chemical. It seemed to seep from the ground itself, making the air feel sticky in our lungs. Lena gagged, pulling her sleeve over her nose. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice muffled. I didn't answer. I didn't have one. Panic started to creep in, subtle at first, then growing with every passing second. We decided to keep moving forward. What else could we do? The path ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees looming taller, their twisted branches clawing at the dim light above. Our footsteps felt unnervingly loud, echoing in the oppressive silence. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following us. But there was nothing, just the endless wall of trees. Then Lena stopped abruptly, her eyes wide with fear. She pointed to the ground. It was a footprint, not ours, barefoot, deep in the soft earth, the toes unnervingly long, the arch too high to be natural. And it was fresh. Lena's hand trembled as she gripped my arm. We're not alone. We pressed on, our pace quickening despite the exhaustion creeping into our legs. The path grew narrower, forcing us to walk single file. I could feel Lena's breath hitch behind me, her fear palpable, almost contagious. Then we heard it again. The tapping. But this time, it was closer, louder, and it wasn't rhythmic anymore. It was following us. I turned around quickly, my heart pounding in my chest, expecting to see something. someone. But there was nothing, just trees and shadows. "Keep moving," I whispered, though my voice shook. The tapping grew louder, turning into a series of sharp, erratic knocks. It seemed to come from all directions now, bouncing off the trees, disorienting us. Lena covered her ears, her eyes squeezed shut. "Stop it!" she cried out. And just like that, it stopped. Silence. But the feeling didn't go away. That sense of being watched, hunted, it clung to us like the damp air. We stumbled into a small clearing, gasping for breath. In the center stood an old wooden sign, leaning slightly. Its paint faded and chipped. "Welcome back," it read. But we had never been here before. Lena stared at the sign, her face pale, lips trembling. "This doesn't make sense." I took a cautious step closer to the sign. Carved beneath the faded letters, barely visible under years of weathering, were two names. Ours. Perfectly etched, as if someone had known we would be here all along. Lena let out a shaky breath, grabbing my hand. "We need to leave. Now." We spun around, trying to retrace our steps, but every direction looked the same. The trees pressed closer, the clearing shrinking, suffocating. Then we heard the tapping again, closer than ever. And this time, it wasn't alone. A whisper followed, soft and unintelligible, like someone murmuring just out of earshot. My skin crawled. Lena squeezed my hand tighter, her nails digging into my skin. We ran. No plan, no direction, just blind, desperate running. The forest seemed endless, the trees blurring together. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but we didn't stop. Not until we burst out of the trees onto a gravel road. We collapsed, gasping, looking around in disbelief. The trailhead was just ahead, our car parked exactly where we left it. But when we reached the car, there was something on the windshield. A note written in shaky, uneven handwriting. "See you next time." I've always loved camping, especially the kind where you have to hike a few miles to find the perfect, secluded spot. There's something about being away from everything. No cars, no streetlights, no noise, except for the wind threading through the trees. It's peaceful, or at least it used to be. Last summer, my friend Jake and I planned a weekend trip to a national forest we'd never been to before. We packed light, just enough gear to last 2 nights. The plan was simple. Hike about 10 miles in, set up camp near a small lake we found on the map, and enjoy the quiet. The first day went smoothly. The trail was overgrown in places, but nothing we couldn't handle. We reached the lake by late afternoon, its surface like glass, untouched and perfect. We pitched our tent on a flat patch of ground a little ways from the shore, started a small fire, and spent the evening talking about nothing and everything. The next morning, we decided to explore the area. We left our camp set up, taking only water bottles and a map. We hiked maybe 5 miles in a loop, following an old, faint trail that eventually brought us back toward the lake from the opposite side. That's when we saw it. Another campsite. It was set up just across the lake from ours, maybe 200 yards away. The tent looked newer than ours, bright red against the green and brown of the woods. There was a small fire pit, smoke still curling from the embers, but we hadn't heard anyone all morning. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Jake frowned. "Did you hear anyone last night?" I shook my head. We were light sleepers, especially out here. A single twig snapping usually woke me up, but we heard nothing. Curiosity got the better of us. We decided to check it out. As we got closer, the unease grew. The campsite looked fresh, like someone had just been there. A mug, half full of coffee, sat on a flat rock, still warm to the touch. A backpack leaned against a tree, partially unzipped, with clothes neatly folded inside. But there was no one around. We called out. No answer. Jake picked up the mug, inspecting it like it held answers. "They can't be far," Maybe they're fishing? But the lake was silent, the water undisturbed. We poked around a little more, hesitant but curious. The tent was zipped shut. Against my better judgment, I unzipped it. Empty. No sleeping bag, no personal items, nothing but the faint impression of someone having lain there recently. Something felt wrong. Really wrong. "Let's go back," I said, trying to mask the nervous edge in my voice. We made our way back to our own campsite, but the woods felt different now. Less welcoming, more watchful. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, though every time I glanced back, there was nothing but trees. When we finally got back to our camp, we both stopped dead. Our tent was gone. Not collapsed, not vandalized. Gone. The ground where it had stood was undisturbed, like it had never been there at all. Our gear, our food, everything was missing. Jake spun in a slow circle, his face pale. We left it right here, right?" I didn't answer. I was too busy scanning the woods, looking for any sign of movement. We decided to head back toward the trailhead immediately. We had enough daylight to cover most of the distance. The problem was, the trail wasn't where we left it. We retraced our steps over and over, but the path never appeared. Landmarks we passed earlier were gone. Trees we recognized seemed to shift when we looked away. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we stumbled upon another clearing. Another campsite. It was identical to the one we found earlier. Same red tent, same half-full coffee mug, same backpack against the tree. But this time, the tent was unzipped. Jake grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "We need to go." We didn't argue. We ran. I don't know how long we ran, but eventually, exhaustion forced us to stop. The woods around us were pitch black, except for the faint glow of the moon slicing through the canopy. That's when we heard footsteps. Not ours. Not an animal. Deliberate, steady footsteps, just out of sight. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. The footsteps stopped. And then, from the darkness, a voice. Calm, close, and impossibly familiar. "You left your tent." We bolted. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes of trees whipping past, the sting of branches against my face, the sound of my own ragged breathing. We found the trail at dawn by some miracle. We didn't stop until we reached the parking lot, collapsing next to Jake's car. We never spoke about it. Not really. But sometimes I catch Jake staring off like he's trying to remember something he can't quite grasp. And last week, I found something in my closet. A bright red tent. It was supposed to be a simple day hike. I'd done this trail a dozen times before. A loop through the woods that took about 3 hours if you didn't stop too often. But this time, something felt off from the start. The trailhead was the same as always, a dirt parking lot with a faded wooden sign marking the entrance. I laced up my boots, adjusted my backpack, and set off. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible, and the forest was quiet except for the occasional crunch of leaves underfoot. About an hour in, I noticed something strange. The trail seemed different. The trees were thicker, the path narrower. I chalked it up to the season. Maybe the undergrowth had grown more than I remembered. But then I saw it, a side trail I'd never noticed before. It wasn't marked, just a faint path veering off to the left. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow it. The further I went, the more the forest seemed to close in around me. The sunlight barely filtered through the canopy, and the air felt heavier, almost damp. After about 20 minutes, I saw it. A small, weathered house nestled in a clearing. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. The windows were cracked, the paint was peeling, and the roof sagged in the middle. But what really caught my attention was the door. It was slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. I hesitated. I knew I should turn back, but something about the house pulled me in. I stepped closer, my boots crunching on the gravel path that led to the front porch. The air smelled like mildew and something else I couldn't quite place. Something sweet and sickly. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the house was dark and dusty. The furniture was old, covered in sheets that had turned gray with age. But there, in the middle of the room, was a single chair. It was clean, as if someone had been sitting in it recently. My heart started to race. I told myself it was just my imagination, but then I heard it. A faint creak, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards above me. I froze. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer, but the creaking stopped. I backed toward the door, my eyes never leaving the staircase that led to the second floor. As I stepped outside, I heard it again, this time louder. It wasn't just a creak, it was footsteps. I didn't wait to see who or what was coming down those stairs. I turned and ran, my backpack bouncing against my shoulders as I sprinted on the trail. The forest seemed to blur around me, the trees closing in as if they were trying to trap me. When I finally reached the main trail, I didn't stop. I ran all the way back to the parking lot, my lungs burning and my legs aching. As I fumbled with my car keys, I glanced back at the trailhead. The sign was gone. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where the sign should have been. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The house, the footsteps, the missing sign. It all felt like a bad dream, but the ache in my legs and the cold sweat on my skin told me it was real. I got in my car and drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The whole way, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the house or the trail behind me, but there was nothing, just the empty road. When I got home, I tried to shake it off. Maybe I'd taken a wrong turn. Maybe the sign had fallen over and I just hadn't noticed. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The next day, I went back to the trailhead. I needed to prove to myself that it had all been in my head, but when I got there, the sign was back, exactly where it should have been. The trail looked normal, the trees less dense, the path wider. I walked the trail again, this time sticking to the main path. I didn't see the side trail, I didn't see the house. Everything was exactly as I remembered it from all those other hikes. But as I was leaving, I noticed something in the dirt near the trailhead. It was a footprint, too small to be mine, and fresh, as if someone had been there just moments before. I never went back to that trail. I've always been an avid hiker. There's something about the isolation, the rhythmic crunch of dirt underfoot, and the towering trees swallowing the sky that makes me feel alive. That's probably why I didn't think twice when my friend Mark suggested we try out Blackwood Trail, a lesser-known path tucked deep into the national forest, about an hour's drive from where we lived. Mark heard about it from some obscure hiking forum. It wasn't on any official maps, but according to a handful of posts, it was beautiful, untouched, quiet, and completely off the grid. The kind of place where your phone has no bars and your mind has no distractions. Exactly my kind of spot. We packed light, water, some protein bars, flashlights, and our phones, mostly for photos. The trailhead was barely marked, just a weathered wooden post with Blackwood carved into it. The letters jagged and uneven, like someone had hacked them in with a pocket knife. No maps, no signs. Just the narrow path disappearing into dense trees. The first few miles were stunning. Thick canopies of oak and pine filtered the sunlight, casting long, dappled shadows. The air was cool, crisp with that earthy scent of moss and old leaves. But as we got deeper, something felt off. I can't explain it. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no rustling squirrels, nothing. Just the sound of our footsteps and the occasional creak of trees swaying, though there was no wind. About 3 miles in, we found something strange. A pile of stones stacked neatly beside the trail, like a crude cairn. Nothing too unusual for a hiking trail, but the rocks were oddly shaped, almost sharp, and each one had a dark, reddish stain. Mark joked that it looked like dried blood. We both laughed it off, but I remember feeling my skin crawl a little. We kept going. That's when we started hearing it. At first, it was faint, like the distant sound of someone talking, but there was no one around. We hadn't seen a single other hiker all day. The voices were low, almost like whispers, just at the edge of hearing. I stopped, thinking maybe it was the wind, but the air was dead still. No breeze, just whispers. Mark heard it too. Probably just the trees, he said, but his voice was tight, forced. We decided to turn back. That's when we realized something was wrong. The trail, it wasn't the same. The path we had been following was gone. In its place was a narrow, winding track we didn't recognize, flanked by thick underbrush that hadn't been there before. We were sure we'd been going straight the whole time, but now the trail twisted unnaturally, looping back on itself, leading us deeper instead of out. Panic started to creep in. We tried using the compass app on Mark's phone, but it kept glitching, the arrows spinning wildly. My phone was no better, frozen on the home screen even after restarting it. That's when we heard it again. Not whispers this time. Laughter. But it wasn't right. It was too layered. Like multiple voices laughing over each other, slightly out of sync. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. We picked up the pace, practically running, trying to find anything familiar. That's when Mark tripped. I helped him up, and that's when I saw it. On the tree next to us, carved deep into the bark, were the words, "We see you." Fresh carvings. The wood around the letters was still raw, sap oozing like blood. We ran. No plan, no direction, just pure instinct. The laughter followed us, growing louder, more distorted. I swear at one point I felt something brush against my arm, though there was nothing there, just empty air. Eventually, we burst out onto a service road, completely different from where we had parked. No trailhead, no sign of Blackwood Trail, just asphalt and fading daylight. We flagged down a passing truck, and the driver looked at us like we were crazy when we asked about the trail. He'd lived in the area his whole life, said there was no such trail in those woods. But here's the thing. When I checked my phone later, flipping through the photos we'd taken, there was one I don't remember taking. It was a blurry shot, dark and out of focus, but you could make out two things. Mark and me standing side by side, and something behind us. Something tall, something pale. Let's just say I don't hike anymore. Turn on notifications so you're the first to know when I upload a new video. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.